Hi everyone, my name is Arian Hawks, and this is my workshop supporting older adults, mental health, end-of-life planning, and living arrangements. I built this for caregivers and family members who want to support the older adults in their lives, especially with some of the harder topics that don't always get talked about. Why I chose these topics. I chose these topics based on interviews I did with two people in my life. First, I talked to my stepmom, who works with older adults as a caregiver. Second, I talked to my nana, who is 68. When I asked what they wanted to learn more about, both of them brought up mental health, death and dying, and living arrangements. These weren't random ideas. They were things that both of them have thought about in real life. My stepmom sees a lot of people struggling with depression and end-of-life decisions in her work, elders who struggle with this. And my nana has been dealing with it on her own. For the first time in 35 years, she lives alone in a house, and this is really taking a toll on her. So she can relate to these things personally. So today's topics. So here's how I organized the workshop. First, we're going to start with topic 1, which is depression and mental health in later life. And then topic 2 is death, dying, and end-of-life communication. Basically, how to talk about end-of-life wishes before a crisis hits instead of waiting till the last minute. And the last topic, topic 3, living arrangements and aging in place. Basically, we'll touch on things like living alone, assisted living, or more collective settings. And through all of this, I'll keep coming back to caregiver strategies, simple things, practical things that caregivers can do to support the older adults in their life. So topic 1, depression and mental health. Depression can look very different in older adults than it does in younger people. Instead of just outright saying, I feel sad, they might show it through things like fatigue or withdrawing from people, changes in appetite, or just saying they don't feel like themselves. Major life changes really can increase risk, like losing a spouse or close friends, retirement, health problems, or moving out of a long-time home. These kinds of changes can pile up and really affect mood. On top of that, late life depression is often unnoticed or untreated. Sometimes families assume, well, of course they're sad, they're old people, which isn't always true or fair. Depression is not just a normal part of aging, and it's something that can and should be treated. Okay, research on mental health. So I found a study that looked at older adults with depression, and it found that even when their depression improves, relapse rates are pretty high. People were more likely to have depression come back if they had high stress, low support, and more functional or physical problems. So it's not a one-and-done type situation. Elderly people, they also need continued support over time. I found another study that interviewed providers about something called treatment-resistant depression in older adults. Many providers said that they felt they were running out of options and that there just weren't enough resources, especially around things like therapy access, caregiver support, and social programs. So when my stepmom said that mental health gets ignored in the 65 and up crowd, the research pretty much it agrees with her, backs it up. Oops. Okay. What caregivers can do in regards to mental health for the elderly. Obviously, they can't fix everything, but they can make a big difference. One step is to notice the subtle behavior changes, like someone sleeping more, losing interest in hobbies, or getting more irritable or withdrawn. Sometimes those small shifts are early warning signs. Second is they can encourage gentle socialization that doesn't have to mean, big events. It could be a short visit or a phone call, church, a senior center, or even just sitting on the porch together. And, thirdly, they can validate these, older adults' feelings instead of brushing them off. Saying things like, "That sounds really hard," or "I'm glad you told me," can go a long way. Fourthly, they can help maintain the connections with family, friends, or community. They can offer rides or set up video calls or help them get to places that matter to them, And lastly, these caregivers can, they can seek professional help these elderly people seek professional help when needed. Like talking to a primary care provider, a therapist, or a psychiatrist who is comfortable working with older adults. Caregivers don't have to carry all of this alone. And now we are on to topic 2, which is death and dying. I want to talk about how, my stepmom mentioned that families will often avoid these conversations until something bad happens. People feel like they're being morbid or, quote unquote, giving up if they start talking about this. But research I have found, shows that many older adults can actually want to express these wishes. They want to talk about what kind of care they do or do not want and where they'd like to be and who should make these decisions for them if they can't. When families plan this stuff early, it reduces stress for everyone instead of guessing what, mom or grandpa would have wanted in the middle of a crisis. People can make decisions that match, this person's values. So research I found a study that looked at, older adults' end-of-life treatment preferences. They found that many older adults prefer less aggressive, more comfort-focused care when there is little hope of recovery. They value quality of life and not just extending it at any cost. But even with these preferences, a lot of people never actually have a full conversation with their doctors about end-of-life wishes, unless someone else starts the conversation. Another study I found piloted a program called iHome. It's a hospice intervention that trains caregivers to manage end-of-life symptoms at home, at the, older person's home during this time. Caregivers who got this training reported more confidence and better communication. That lines up with, what my stepmom said, that caregivers need tools and support to make these situations less chaotic and more dignified. And then some conversation tips. There are some simple ways to start these conversations without making them feel scary or overwhelming. First, you gotta choose calm timing, obviously. Not in the middle of a medical crisis or a family argument. I feel like picking a quiet moment when everyone can actually talk is very important. Secondly, you can ask open questions like, what matters most to you if you were really sick? Or what would you want your care to look like? That shifts the focus from specific treatments to values, which I think is equally as important. Third, normalize planning. You can say, we're not expecting anything to happen soon, but I want to make sure I honor your wishes. Fourth, encourage advanced directives, like a living will or naming a healthcare proxy. Documentation like this helps to make sure that, said elderly person's preferences are followed when the time comes. And lastly, remember that these talks are not just one-time events. They're going to have to be revisited over time as health and relationships or living situations change. My last topic is living arrangements. For people who live alone, these elderly people, loneliness can be really common, especially after losing a spouse or someone important to them. My Nana talked about this when she described living alone for the first time, in the last year. It's been a big adjustment at 68. On top of this, transitions in living arrangements often happen during crisis, like a fall or hospitalization or sudden decline in health. That can make moves feel rushed and traumatic instead of planned and thoughtful. And then research, to back this, to add more detail, a study that I read explored how older adults experience loneliness and belonging across different living situations. They found that people living alone were more likely to describe feelings of loneliness and social loss, especially if they had limited and local support. In contrast, though, people in collective living arrangements, like co-housing, group living, or whatever it may be, often described a stronger sense of belonging and community, as long as the environment respected their independence. And then one other study, last one for this, looked at assisted living residents and aging in place. They found whether someone could stay in assisted living until end of life depended heavily on financial eligibility, especially for people who were dual eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. So money and policy decisions play a big role in where people can realistically live as they get older. And what caregivers can do for this, they can help make living arrangement decisions less reactive and more thoughtful. They can discuss preferences early, before a crisis happens, instead of waiting last minute. They can also assess safety and mobility needs, stuff like stairs, bathroom safety, of that nature. They can also involve the older adult in the decisions as much as possible. I think that's important. Another thing they can do is be patient with the transitions. Moves can be emotional and take time to adjust. And lastly, wherever someone lives, help them try to build a social connection through neighbors, church, senior centers, whatever it may be. So just to wrap everything up, mental health matters at every age. Depression in later life is common, but it's not just, getting old. It deserves real attention, support, and treatment. Early end-of-life conversations, they give people dignity and clarity, and it can avoid crisis-driven decisions. Living arrangements strongly shape well-being of these older people, emotionally, socially, and, financially. Planning ahead is very beneficial. And lastly, across all three areas, listening and inclusion are key. When we really listen to older adults and involve them in these decisions, we can make aging feel less isolating and more respectful. And yep, that is all.